Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here today and for watching via webcast. I want to start by saying that I'm honored that so many people who are directly affected by this investigation are watching today, both here in person and elsewhere. J'aimerais vous dire tout d'abord combien je suis honoré que tant de personnes directement concernées par cette enquête soient avec nous aujourd'hui, ici en personne et ailleurs. Now I'm speaking of the adults with developmental disabilities and their families who know firsthand what we mean when we speak of crisis situations in our report. These are the people that had the courage to complain about a well-intentioned but deeply flawed developmental services system. They told our investigators of their frustrations and heart-wrenching experiences exposing shocking systemic problems. And they persevered through years of bureaucratic back and forth to achieve small successes, one case at a time. Their dedication and devotion to their loved ones finally has given way to constructive changes that will ensure thousands of other Ontarians will not have to endure a similar ordeal. For that and for their patience, I thank them on behalf of my entire office and for helping us bring about positive change. Because it's thanks to their stories that we were able to do what an Ombudsman office does best, work with the many layers of government and agency officials to find constructive solutions. You know, when we first began this investigation, we encountered the same roadblocks that many of these families had faced for years. A fragmented, overly complex system of service agencies and funding programs, and a baffling lack of flexibility from officials at the top. In the early stages of this investigation, when we uncovered obvious problems at the local or regional level and tried to get the ministry officials to intervene, they took a hands-off stance. The official line was, "We are not case managers." Helping with individual cases, even crisis situations, was seen as helping people jump the queue for service. And the ministry clung to its big picture vision of a modern developmental services system based on individual choice and community supports. For a long time, it was unwilling to acknowledge its responsibility for addressing the systemic issues that we were bringing to its attention. Meanwhile, vulnerable people with complex needs were living in hospitals, long-term care homes, homeless shelters, and jails. Shades of a shameful institutional system that was abolished decades ago. Some parents even made the heart-wrenching decision to relinquish responsibility for their adult children to the community in a desperate attempt to get them the services they needed. Entre-temps, des personnes vulnérables aux besoins complexes sont restées confinées dans des hôpitaux, des établissements de soins de longue durée, des refuges pour sans-abri et même des prisons. Vestige d'un système institutionnel scandaleux qui a été aboli il y a des décennies. Now, at times, our own staff had a taste of the futility that so many families experienced. Finding help seemed almost impossible at times. But persistence did pay off, one case at a time. Working with ministry officials and agencies, we found it was possible. Suitable homes were found, funding flowed, and placements were created. And ultimately, after several months of working collaboratively, we saw a culture change at the ministry. In 2014, as you all know, there was a major budget increase for developmental services, bringing annual spending in the sector to $2 billion this fiscal year. But the fundamental issue here has never been money. After all, it's incredibly costly to house people in hospitals and long-term care homes when they don't belong there. That money could be spent far more efficiently. What really made the difference is leadership and attitudinal changes at the ministry from the top on down. We've found that officials are no longer aloof and are more willing to engage directly in resolving individual crisis cases. They are no longer on the defensive when dealing with our office, and they see the value that we can add in helping them maximize service to Ontarians. Most importantly, when I met last month with the Minister and the Deputy Minister, they agreed to implement all 60 of my recommendations, including those that require the government to take the lead in fixing systemic problems province-wide. Plus important encore, quand j'ai rencontré la ministre et la sous-ministre le mois dernier, elles ont accepté de mettre en œuvre toutes mes recommandations, dont celle préconisant que le gouvernement joue un rôle directeur dans le règlement des problèmes systémiques partout dans la province. Now, many of my recommendations involve research and consultation, and working with other areas, such as justice and health systems, which won't happen overnight. But others are common sense, such as ensuring that vulnerable people aren't left to return to potentially dangerous situations, and planning for emergencies and the inevitable challenges that will come with age and illness. The ministry has already begun addressing some of these issues, and you can find a list of all the steps that it has taken so far at the back of my report. But we all know there is still work to do. We are still receiving complaints from individuals in crisis situations. In fact, we've had about 25 more since this report was finalized, but thankfully, the pace has slowed considerably. My office and I will continue working with the families and the ministry to resolve these urgent issues, building on what we have achieved thus far. And I look forward to reporting on the ministry's progress in the future. We will keep the spotlight on this issue, which is critical for so many families. There still are problems to be solved. So now I'd be pleased to take any questions you may have. Je me ferai un plaisir de répondre à vos questions.
Une famille qui se retrouverait en situation de crise aujourd'hui, est-ce qu'elle aurait accès à des ressources et à quel genre de ressources elle aurait accès?
Il y a plus de fonds maintenant disponibles. Le plus important recommandation, c'est que le ministère prenne charge de diriger les programmes, diriger les fonds, et ça a été déjà mis en œuvre, donc c'est très prometteur pour le futur. Maintenant, il s'agit de garantir l'accès à ces programmes-là, puis avec toutes les recommandations que nous avons faites, on a beaucoup d'espoir que ça va améliorer la situation.
Mais en ce moment, là, pour les familles, parce qu'on voit des histoires d'horreur dans votre rapport, une famille qui aujourd'hui se retrouve avec une situation critique, oui. Est-ce que, en situation aiguë, est-ce qu'on peut avoir accès à des ressources maintenant, aujourd'hui? Bien,
nous aidons des familles à toutes les semaines de trouver les ressources, les services, le support nécessaire, et on a beaucoup plus de succès maintenant que 2 ans passés. Donc, la situation s'est améliorée beaucoup.
In Toronto specifically, there's been a lot of talk about, how the police service can save money, and there's been a lot of talk about how dealing with people with these kinds of disabilities is a burden on police at times. I mean, when you talk about your recommendations, do you think that any of those specifically could make a difference on that and could ease that burden on the police service?
Absolutely, absolutely. We're finding in some of the cases we highlight, especially that happened in Ottawa, we see the police services dealing with very frustrating situations where somebody can't go back home. There's nobody else there's no place else to put them other than jail sometimes, and that's very frustrating, time-consuming for the police. So if the proper support and resources and services were available to these people, if they had a place to go that was appropriate, I think that it would alleviate the burden on police services considerably.
When this report was launched, or investigation was launched in 2012, it was supposed to take 6 months. I'm wondering if some of the cases detailed in the report maybe could have been avoided, or maybe these families could have been helped out sooner had the report been released earlier.
This report could not have been done in 6 months. What we found was that we were inundated with complaints. We got about 1,000 complaints in the first 18 months that kept coming in, so we kept learning about the situation. We kept working with the ministry. As I said in my remarks, it was tough going at the beginning, and then all of a sudden we started to get collaboration. And so during that time, even though it's taken this time, it's not that the situation was static. We were still solving problems, getting people the resources they needed and helping, and the ministry was changing and evolving during that time. So it's not like the ministry is waiting till tomorrow to make changes. It's already happening.
What of your 60 recommendations is the most important? This is a huge problem. We're talking about people in crisis. They're not waiting days, weeks, months. They're waiting years. What is most important?
I think the first one is the most important, that the ministry acknowledge its role in taking the lead in this field and not just being hands-off and directing money to development service agencies, but taking the lead and establishing definitions, directing programs, and making sure that there is movement on this file. That's the most important one, I think.
Mais qu'est-ce que ça vous dit, le fait que votre bureau a dû être impliqué à aider des familles directement? Ça nous dit quoi, ça?
Bien, c'est notre rôle, d'abord. C'est notre rôle de régler des problèmes, de recevoir des plaintes individuelles. On fait ça sur une base régulière dans tous les domaines, dans toutes les sphères du gouvernement. Donc, ce n'est pas exceptionnel. Mais nous offrons un service aux gens qui n'accèdent pas facilement aux services prodigués par le gouvernement et ça fait partie de notre boulot.
Vous dites quand même que l'offre là, dépasse là, énormément les besoins. Dites-nous un peu, c'est quoi la proportion? On en est où exactement?
Bien, c'est qu'il y a des familles qui se retrouvent dans une situation de crise, toujours, qui n'ont pas accès à des services ou des supports. Et nos recommandations visent l'amélioration de la situation. Puis je pense que la première chose à constater, c'est que le ministère doit prendre un rôle de leadership. Et c'est déjà fait. Donc ça, c'est le premier pas. Après ça, les fonds ont été alloqués pour régler ces problèmes. Mais ça va prendre beaucoup de coopération avec les divers ministères. Le ministère de la Santé, le ministère de la Justice, il y a des, permettez-moi l'expression en anglais, overlap. Il y a des, pas suffisamment. Donc, on est très encouragé de voir le progrès dans ce dossier.
Chez les anglophones, il y a des problèmes. Imaginons, chez les franco-ontariens, les francophones, il y a encore moins de services. C'est quoi la situation de ce côté-là?
Bien, nous avons constaté qu'effectivement, dans les régions, il y a moins de services disponibles. Et une des recommandations, c'est de déterminer si on peut transférer les gens d'une région à l'autre pour avoir accès aux services, au moins dans le court terme.
Est-ce que vous avez parlé à certains francophones, certaines familles francophones?
Oui, oui. Ils font partie de nos plaignants, absolument.
Were you slowed down by the province in the first couple of years of your investigations? You mentioned that you were waiting for that culture change, and you also talk about in the report how progress since 2014 has been implemental. Do you think they've been moving too slowly in the changes they've already promised?
I think that there was some pushback, for lack of a better word, in the early days, a lack of recognition of their role and of the problems. And I think what we've done quite persuasively during this investigation was make them aware of the gravity of the problem and the need for urgent action. And that's what they're going to be responding to.
I've heard from the ministry, there's only so much money to go around. There is no more money. It sounds from your report like you're saying that's not the solution. More money, but how things are spent.
Well, there is more money coming, so let's take that. But the problem is that it's not just about money. It's the allocation of money. It's the direction of services. Direction needed from the top, the leadership from the top, coming up with definitions of what a crisis is. There was inconsistency. That's part of what we talk about in the report, is that the system is so daunting and so complex because there are differences from one region to another. There's a lack of consistency. So while the ministry does not have necessarily a legal obligation to run this, we've convinced it that it has a moral obligation because there's nobody else better placed than the ministry to set the standards for these different agencies across the province and make sure that they're delivering supports in a way that's needed.
Are the agencies failing in the sense that even your report mentions some of the staff don't even know what programs are out there and available to these families?
As we say, there's a lack of consistency amongst different agencies and across the province, and it's the ministry that has to take the lead in establishing the norms and standards and ensuring compliance. And one of the things we talk about is data collection and distributing where are spaces available, where are the needs, and matching things up. So that's going to be an important part of the process.
In the report, there are 60 recommendations, and what's the priority that the ministry should start?
Well, I think, as I said earlier, the most important one, the first one, and it's been acknowledged, is that the ministry has to take the lead on this file. It has to acknowledge its role in setting standards for the developmental service agencies across the province and go from there. It has to collect more information. It has to deal with and collaborate with other ministries. So, as I said earlier, that may take some time. But straight away, it can start issuing directives, getting definitions down as to what is a crisis situation, and intake rules, that kind of thing. So those can be acted upon immediately.
Is there, it sounds like a more hands-on approach. Is the current funding adequate for the ministry to take on a more hands-on approach rather than just come up with policy and distribute funds? Well,
we'll see. I mean, time will tell whether the funding is adequate for the changes that need to be made, right? We're going to see what the changes are. First of all, we're going to see what kind of programs are developed, what kinds of policies are put in place, and what assets are needed in different locales, and time will tell whether the funding is sufficient or not. I can't say today whether it is or not.
Sorry.
What can we expect in terms of time frame for the implementation of all 60 recommendations?
Well, you'll have to ask the ministry about that. What I can tell you is that we will follow up on this. What we say in the Ombudsman world, we shine a spotlight on issues. Well, it's not a flashbulb, it's a spotlight. And we'll follow up with the ministry in 6 months, and we will continue to be involved in this issue. And we will continue to facilitate access for families, too. The people that come to us that need assistance, we will continue to do that on a day-to-day basis, as we always have.
How optimistic are you that you can, that the ministry can change its culture and attitude, and how quickly? And have you seen any examples, or can you cite some examples of where things may have changed significantly for families?
Yeah. Well, we've seen the facilitation process get a lot easier from our point of view. As I said earlier, there's been a change in direction, a change in attitude, and the people who work day to day on the files come back to me and say, wow, there's just a different attitude over there. The people are well-meaning. They're trying to do the right thing. And frankly, from the reports that I've received in the last 4 months, roughly, I can't say I've ever seen a ministry try harder to do the right thing and get things right. It acknowledges the tremendous challenges. It acknowledges that people are in dire situations. And it's working really hard to address them and fix them.
Is that translated to specific
It's translated to
cases
specific cases. I can't talk about specific cases, but we've seen it. It does translate to specific cases and getting resolutions. As I said earlier, finding placements and getting access to support and services that people need.
François, pouvez-vous nous décrire le changement d'attitude ou le changement de culture au sein du ministère? On est parti d'où et on est rendu où et où devrait-on aller?
Comme je l'ai dit dans mes remarques, on est commencé avec une attitude de plus ou moins laisser-faire. La réponse était, nous ne sommes pas des gestionnaires de cas. Même dans les cas individuels, le ministère ne semblait pas être obligé ou ne voyait pas la nécessité de s'impliquer dans des cas individuels. Et maintenant, nous avons fait du progrès parce que le ministère reconnaît sa responsabilité de diriger les agences, les services, et même de s'impliquer dans des cas très, très difficiles. Donc, c'est une amélioration de la situation.
From your investigation, what do you think, where did you turn the corner? What was with the ministry to change the attitudes? Was there a change in minister? Was there one particular incident that caused this change in culture? Was it a combination of things? Or what do you think changed the attitude? Was it personnel?
So it was before my time. I've only been the Ombudsman since April 1st, but I'm told that when the Assistant Deputy Minister was changed in 2014, that's when it started. And then since then we've had a new Deputy Minister. And as I said, when I met with the Minister and the Deputy Minister recently last month, I just had a great reception. We had a great meeting, and there was a full acknowledgement of the severity and the gravity of the situation, the need for urgent change, and the people who deal with the ministry day to day come back to me, report back to me and say they're really working hard over there. They're trying to make things better. And we've seen monthly reports and updates on progress on different cases, and that bears that out.
What do you think was the light bulb moment? Was it just a change in personnel? Was there something that happened, or was it the fact that you were?
I think it was a confluence of various factors. I think that the change in the Assistant Deputy Minister was one, but also there was a critical mass. I mean, you just couldn't ignore the numbers of people that were bringing forth their problems. And then, of course, what I think the staff did in preparing this report is just make such compelling stories real, right? To bring light on such compelling, tragic stories. They're heartbreaking, these stories, and they just cried for attention. And finally we got through.
The $810 million from the 2014 budget, that's only over 3 years, which will be expiring fairly soon. Are you recommending that becomes a permanent budget fixture?
We don't set specific dollar figures. We say address the problems and determine how much money is needed. Now it's up to $2 million for the next fiscal year, and as I responded to the question in French, we'll see if it's adequate. We have to wait to see what the rollout is, what programs and services are changed or developed, how the system looks in a year from now to see whether the funding is adequate.
Vous parlez beaucoup de problèmes en situation critique, en situation de crise, en période aiguë. Est-ce qu'il faudrait aussi s'intéresser en amont aux sources du problème et peut-être aider les gens avant qu'on se rende au système judiciaire ou qu'on soit à trouver une solution pour régler une situation critique?
Absolument. Puis les recommandations traitent ce problème-là. On recommande que les agences prennent soin de garder les statistiques sur les gens potentiellement en crise avant que ça arrive. Les situations où il y a peut-être un risque d'abandonnement par les parents, un risque que les gens vont se retrouver en prison. Donc, de faire un suivi sur ces gens-là et avertir le système au potentiel. Oui, absolument.
Parce que plusieurs terminent en prison et là, ils ne reçoivent pas les soins nécessaires. C'est quoi le portrait que vous avez dressé là?
Ben, c'est justement, il y a un manque de support, manque de services. Il y a des gestionnaires de cas qui sont dans les régions. Peut-être il y a moins de gestionnaires de cas francophones, peut-être, pour bien servir les gens. Donc, tout ça, c'est encapsulé dans les recommandations. On recommande qu'il y ait plus d'accès aux gestionnaires de cas. Ce sont des gens qui sont spécialisés à naviguer le système et rendre l'accès plus facile. Oui. Any questions? All right. Well, I want to thank you, everybody, for your attention on this important issue. We will continue to follow up and report on this issue. Thank you.